It seemed like at a certain point, all my heroes played Telecasters.
I first saw Buddy Holly playing a Stratocaster, and I just thought that looked like an instrument from Mars.
Something about when you get rough with a Strat, to me, it's like, I don't know, something else comes out of it. It's like,
there's something about a Stratocaster that, I don't know, I'm personally attuned to.
You know, it's beauty, but at the bottom, it's just pure utility. It wouldn't be the success it was if it wasn't such a damn good instrument. You just can't top it. You know, everything is either a copy of this or one or two other guitars. But that son of a gun, he got it right the first time.
Leo Fender was born and grew up in Orange County. He was born on a farm. Leo played saxophone. He, a bright student, was basically self-taught. He liked to experiment with anything electrical. He opened a radio repair shop, and his interest was in tubes and radios and speakers. He patented a phonograph changer, and one of the things that he did was he offered to repair instruments, electric instruments. People would bring them in. Of course, he would look at them and think to himself, I could build a better one. That's really where his inspiration came from. He was not a guitar player who, sitting there playing the guitar, said, boy, this isn't up to my standards. This needs to do more. It was simply from looking at construction and saying, there are more efficient ways, there are more practical ways, there are better ways to build these guitars, and we ought to be able to get these guitars to perform better than they're performing. I one time asked Leo, did you ever meet Jimi Hendrix or Eric Clapton or the people who really popularized your guitars? He said, well, no, but I met Bob Wills. And he's got a picture of the Bob Wills bus at the Fender factory with the Fender employees standing out front. Prized possession.
Leo's favorite song was Faded Love.
Well, the Fender story starts, I think, clear back in about 1940. At that time, I was operating a small radio parts store in Santa Ana and selling radio parts to Leo Fender. And he had a radio shop in a service station, and just a bench in a service station, where he was servicing radios, and I was supplying the parts for him. And we got to be pretty friendly during that time, and that carried on up to the time when I went in the Army. And I went in the Army, and of course Leo didn't go in the Army because he only had one eye, and of course they don't want anybody shooting a gun that has only one eye. During the war, when you couldn't get any products, some of the musicians would come by and they'd be playing out at town hall or someplace, and Leo would fix their amplifiers for them. These were Epiphone or Gibson or some of the things that were built prior to the war. There were a few, not very many. And there were some that were homemade too. And I think Leo probably scrounged around and got a few parts together. May have made 2 or 3 amplifiers at that time, but there just weren't parts of the necessary type available for that sort of thing. And then eventually, Leo got to piddling around with Doc Kaufman and started developing some of these things. And Doc, of course, had the pickup ideas, and they developed a record changer, which they ultimately sold to New Products Company. But
Of course, Doc, his first partner in the guitar business. And they built small amplifiers and those small lap steel guitars. Doc was a guitar player himself, a very good one. And he played in groups, bands, and did things. And was very well liked and very intelligent for the electronics. And I think he played a big part in designing the electronic pickup, because I really think he was probably one of the people that encouraged Leo a great deal to get into this.
There were various groups of people in the Southern California guitar community who at various times you could sort of mix and match and get different groupings. In the 20s, there was John Dopiera and his brothers, and they were affiliated with Rickenbacker. They were affiliated with George Beecham. George Beecham and Paul Barth would later design the frying pan guitar manufactured by Rickenbacker. Doc Kaufman, who had worked with Barth, knew all about Rickenbacker guitars, was very closely associated with Rickenbacker, would become Leo Fender's first partner in guitar manufacturing. F.C. Hall, who acquired the Rickenbacker company from Adolf Rickenbacker, was the owner of Radio Tel, which was Fender's first distributor. So there is this nexus of Kaufman, Fender, Rickenbacker, Beecham, Barth, the Dopieras, all sort of working in various groups together at different times, say from the 20s up through, say, the 40s.
After World War II, the lap steel was a big item. The country was hungry for merchandise after the war. Because there was a demand for that type of thing, the studio operators, we started selling some of the six-string lap-type guitars. First K&F guitar was the lap steel, made out of wood, and they were a gray crackle finish, just like the gray crackle you find on instrument cabinets and things like that. I think that Doc was a little bit afraid of Leo and the way he operated at that moment. And Doc had been through depression and one thing and another, and he had his family to think about, so I think that he just felt he could do better and be more secure on his own. It was an amicable arrangement.
Doc Kaufman and Leo were in business as partners before I came on the scene. And I got acquainted with Leo, and he had a radio repair shop, and I used to go in there and buy records from him and visit with him. And so he started asking me, why don't you come over here and work with me? And I said, Leo, I don't really, he made small lap steel guitars and amplifiers. And I told him, I said, I'm not really interested in steel guitars. And he kept asking me. Finally one day he says to me, I have some new buildings that I'm going to be moving into. And he said, why don't you come over and work a day or two or three and see what you think about what we're doing. And I told him, I said, well, let me think about it. And I thought about it 2 or 3 days, and I finally went over there and I said, yeah, I think I will do that, Leo. I'll come over. And so I went over there, and there was only a couple, maybe 2 gals and some like that working over there. And he had some electronic work he needed to have done, and so I did this for him. Repaired some small amplifiers and did a few things. And after about 2 or 3 days, I was getting ready to move on somewhere else. And finally he said to me, you mean you're not gonna stay here? And I said, no, not really. I don't really like steel guitars, and I'm not that much interested in building amplifiers. He said, I'm kind of interested in trying, to come up with a solid body electric guitar.
But naturally, the idea had to be stimulated there someplace, because you could play the steel guitar loud without feedback, but you couldn't play a box guitar loud without feedback.
Merle Travis probably was the first musician in this area, at least, that had a solid body electric guitar, which was built by Paul Bigsby.
And I think I'm correct in saying that Paul Bigsby was the one who developed the first standard guitar, because before we ever had one, I was in Richmond, Virginia with our salesman down there, and Travis was down there in the studio, and we went in the studio with him, and he was playing one at the time, and I told Leo about it. The head and everything that we eventually developed followed pretty closely the design that Bigsby had on his original guitar. The only trouble with Bigsby, he was a great craftsman and did some wonderful things. And if I do say so myself, Leo was prone to copy him.
Paul was an older man at that time, and Paul, I really think Paul was more of a designer than he was to manufacture. He built nice instruments, but it was kind of a onesie-twosie kind of a thing, custom-built things. And I don't really think Paul really wanted to be in the guitar business except do custom work. After we got started designing and working on solid body guitars, Leo wanted to put more time on the designing of guitars and didn't want to put any more time in on repairing radios, even though he had some people working for him repairing radios, but he still took some of his time to be involved with that. So he got an idea that he would sell this radio shop, this repair shop. And Dale was interested in it, Dale Hyatt, and Dale bought the repair shop and left the operation over there. So this kind of left it open there for me to kind of fall right into that spot. And Dale was kind of maybe what you might call the foreman of the shop. And he only had 2 or 3 people working over there. It was the first one that Leo and I built in the first year we were together, when mostly it was done at night. It looks almost exactly like the Telecaster still. I mean, the shape, the head had 3 keys on each side of the head rather than the 6 in line on one side. And it was the only one built with that type of neck on it. Of course, we tried many, many things before we came up with the final design on it. But after we got that final design, there was very few changes made from that until we went into the production of it.
I took the first guitar to the show back in 1949 or 1950, somewhere back in there, and showed it. And it was, what's that thing? You know, and we got all kinds of comments. What do you say? Do you paddle your canoe with that thing, or you swat flies with it? What do you do with it? But they all laughed, you know. And about that time, we started getting some of them into some of the Western bands. And they were the forerunner of the whole thing, the rock and roll and everything else. And, of course, rock and roll was coming along, and they wanted to play loud, and they couldn't do it with a box guitar. So we had a ready-made market for a solid body guitar that wouldn't feedback when you turned up the volume.
We would try different kind of pickups and different windings and different many kind of things, different types of wood, different types of neck material, different types of strings, and we tested everything as we designed. We would test the part, and finally you get something put together that looks like it might be workable. So we mainly tried to design a guitar that had a shape a little bit like the normal guitar. It had the dip and this and, you know, but another thing we really wanted to do was get a cutout large enough that the player's hand would slide freely all the way to the end without interference with this by part of the body. And that was one of the big features of the guitar. By having individual poles, each one of them had the same amount of magnetism as the next one. So you had an even amount of magnetic field on each pole. And this was able then, by adjusting this pickup higher or lower, I mean, for its height, raising or lowering it, you could adjust that pickup so it would balance out the volume better. We kept the treble end of the pickup close to the bridge, so the highs would be really crisp and sharp, and we wanted more bass, so we put it on an angle to create space in here to get the pickup so it would produce more bass. Of course, that first guitar, it only had 2 controls, didn't have a switch on it, it had 2 controls. All it needed was a tone and volume control. And later on, of course, the second pickup, which we called the rhythm pickup, and then we added the switch here, which selected either pickup, or in the center, you had both of them. These screws go all the way through this part of the body into the neck, and it holds this neck onto the body, this so-called bolt-on neck. The reason we did it was to make it easy to add the neck on if it had to be repaired, At the same time, it made it easier to manufacture the body and neck separately in the factory. And it could be either body or neck, or both could be replaced even in the field.
Well, of course, the music business is very traditional in that respect. And it has to sound like a musical instrument. It has to look like a musical instrument normally, like the instrument it's supposed to be. And naturally, the solid body guitar was such a departure from that. In the initial stages, we got criticism from everybody. Even the players, you know, that hadn't played or tried it, they, oh, geez, what's that? And particularly from the other manufacturers, good-naturedly, but, you know, hey, Don, what you got there? And, of course, in the ensuing year or two, we started selling quite a few of them. They started showing up in these bands and showing what they could do, and then, of course, the race was on.
Of course, at the same time, we had to design some of our tooling, like machinery as well as tooling to make, you know, like the parts. We had to have tooling made, and we had to build a lot of the machinery that did the shaping and the different things for the guitars. We had to have it built, design the machinery and have it built, and build some of it ourselves. And since it was such a new industry, there was nothing available to buy. You couldn't go out and buy a piece of machinery to make a guitar neck.
I can't remember for sure if it was the Broadcaster or the Esquire that I showed first. I think it was a single pickup job that I showed first. And then went to double pickup. But that was a Broadcaster originally. We sold some of those.
In '49, I had seen a Broadcaster, and the guitar player let me fool with the thing during intermission, and it was an excellent playing guitar. The action was just tremendous, and he was getting some sounds out of it that I couldn't possibly get out of my guitar. And he told me about Leo Fender. So I was back home in Amarillo when I got a call that there was a band forming on the West Coast, and it was a big Western swing band, and I should go to Dallas, Texas, and audition for it, which I did, got the job, and went out there, and the first thing I did was look up Leo Fender. And I bought a Telecaster guitar and a Pro amp, I believe was the amp. And I didn't have any money, and I paid him $18 a month and swept the floor, and he used my ears.
Bill was a musician, traveled with the band, and also he was a studio musician as well. And he came out, I think he only worked part-time at first, when he first came. And then Bill used to go out and field test a lot of the things we did. He would take the instrument out with a different kind of a pickup or a different kind of a part, whatever it was, and he would try it and get back with us on what he had learned on it. And Bill was a very big help in all this new designing. And Rex Scallion also was another man that used to press us hard to make some changes on it. And Jimmy Bryant, we provided some guitars for him to use, and this set the thing really rolling because everybody wanted to play like Jimmy Bryant, and so they wanted to have a guitar like he had. And so the production really picked up at that time.
Well, once you made it heard, and the guitar player could outplay the drummer, then you had something going. You had a real deal going, and you had a lot of noise going. And between the guitar player and the drummer, they outplayed the bass, and that's the reason we came along with a solid body bass. The bass player had to be heard too. So we had to make a solid body bass, had to make an amplifier that would stand up under bass treatment, and then they could all be heard. And of course, not only the Western bands, but then the rock bands came along, and the louder they could play, the better they were. It didn't make any difference if they played well or not, as long as they played loud.
So we started experimenting with electric basses. And we did the same way as we did on the guitar. There was nothing available. There wasn't such a thing as electric bass. So we started building it, and we created a body a little larger and a longer neck. And also the keys, we had to take keys that were made for those big upright basses and cut them down, cut the metal down to small size to create the keys for the strings. Then that brought us to another problem. Where would you get a string to work on the magnetic pickup? Because the early basses used what they referred to as catgut strings. So we looked at that and bought some of these different strings that were available. And to make those strings work on a magnetic pickup, right where it passed over the magnetic pole we wrapped fine wire on those strings, real fine wrapping on it. Quite.
It was guitar players, for the most part, that learned to play the bass in the beginning, because they could translate very easily in their mind those 4 strings on the bass from the guitar. And then after that, regular bass players, especially in recording studios, producers started calling for a Fender bass sound, a Fender bass sound. It's still listed in Local 47 union book out there, Fender bass players.
I was selling them from the very beginning and been promoting them from the very beginning. They had no outlet to sell them except maybe a trickle out of the local store they had there. They were selling them through the radio store, through the wholesale radio store. When we actually formed the sales company, there were 4 of us. There was Francis Hall, Leo, Charlie Hayes, and myself. And we formed the sales company in 1953. And shortly thereafter, Francis bought the Rickenbacker company, and that didn't fit in with our plans, so we carried along with it for a while, and it was kind of a jumbled-up mess there for a while, until ultimately Charlie Hayes was killed in 1955, and that left Leo and Francis and myself, and we ultimately bought Francis' interest out and just left the 2 of us in the thing.
Well, I thought that the Fender company could produce both instruments as far as that goes, but they decided that they wanted to stick with Fender only, so we didn't go ahead with that.
Well, Forrest came on board to handle the manufacturing and did a very creditable job of it. It got to the point where we'd grown to a considerable degree, and it just wasn't possible for Leo to do it all. He had to give up part of it. And he gave up the part that he probably liked less, and that was out there on the day-to-day basis, seeing the machines ran and the paint got on and all this sort of thing. And he brought Forrest in, who had some background in manufacturing, or at least in industrial engineering, so to speak. And he straightened out some of the processes and got some efficiencies going that we didn't have before. And he could see places where Leo was doing things because he liked it that way, but he was able to change it to where it was more efficient, and he did a credible job there, I'll say that. He contributed a lot to the company as far as making things go. He was effective.
When he asked me if I'd come in and help him run the company, he was in a mess financially. Some of the employees' paychecks were bouncing. He had very little credit. He had to pay cash for most of his material. It was pretty hard for some of these dealers to accept the product that Leo Fender was turning out.
Don Randall was also pushing Leo to add another guitar to the line. And so Freddie Tavares came on board about 10. He drew this instrument up.
There's some controversy on how Leo happened to make the Stratocaster in the first place, and some people say that it was made for a particular musician. Well, I worked with Leo all those years, and the first time I heard that was after Leo passed away. Freddie Tavares put the first lines on paper when he started with Leo full-time in the latter part of '53.
Leo was uncanny in that he could take somebody else's ideas, and if you could get the thought across to him, he could make it happen. He could figure the size of the screw, the amount of threads per inch, and all of that in his mind, and put it on a piece of an envelope and then go out there and make it.
The design of Stratocaster, that was kind of evolved from the Telecaster, from the basic plan of the guitar. It did have a lot of new ideas that wasn't on the Telecaster, like the vibrato.
And Bill Carson was the one that told Leo that, he said, Leo, he said, on this guitar, this new one you're working on, he said, that guitar should fit you just like a shirt. Well, when Bill was referring to his shirt, you must understand, He was playing guitar. Now, he played lead guitar with Hank Thompson. Bill was a heck of a good musician. And when he was talking about shirts, he meant the Western kind of shirt, and those babies fit tight. So when he was talking about that guitar should fit you like a shirt, he meant something that was going to be snug, that you could play, that was going to be very comfortable.
I insisted that the instrument balance on me, because everyone that I'd had up until then wanted to fall either to the right or to the left. In order to use whatever dexterity you've got between your two hands, you need to be free to play the instrument and not support it one way or the other. So the horn on the top of the Stratocaster grew and grew in an effort to balance the guitar. And Freddie Tavares said it wouldn't look quite so ugly if you'd put a horn on the bottom to give it a little bit of symmetry.
Freddie was a unique individual. He was a Hawaiian, of course. He used to play with Harry Owens, and great Hawaiian guitar player, standard guitar player. He was the first one that Leo had as an assistant in there that I recall, and he was pretty steady in there all the time. He did a lot of the work, a lot of the legwork, and I'm sure he contributed a lot to the ideas too. Freddie had a way of working with him, and I don't know how he would have driven me crazy if I'd have been over there with him like that, but because he'd tell Freddie, now you make a little line right down here, just a neatsy-weensy line right down here, and then bring it back and let me see it. Freddie, bring it back and let me see it. Well, Freddie, and he only had one eye, well, Freddie, I think that's about right. Particularly if they were laying out a chassis or anything like that, you know, it just teensy-beensy this, and Freddie'd have to bring it back, show him every little move he made. But Freddie was good at it, and he maintained his decorum all the time. And
now, after Freddie Tavares came on board, he not only was a good engineer, musically he was such a genius. And so it was much easier for Freddie to be a conduit of your own ideas and get things done then, because he knew what you were talking about.
Bill says we should have it so each string has its own bridge section, so it can be raised or lowered or lengthened or shortened to make the proper intonation. Now, the intonation, means when you note a string down here, some particular note, that thing, if it doesn't note in tune, then you may have to adjust your length of your string. See, from the string, from the bone nut to the bridge is set a certain length.
Play the string open at whichever string it is that you pick open. At the 12th fret, you play the harmonic. If you press it down at the 12th fret, it should have the same pitch, not sharp, not flat. You won't hear a wavelength or a wave beat if it's properly intonated. And as a result of that, depending on the gauge of strings that's used, the bridge saddles may be all over the place as far as adjustment back and forth. A fixed bridge or a compensated bridge just does not do it. It didn't for me.
Marketing wanted a superior, higher priced instrument, a prettier instrument. And every time we did this, we put it out with a number of musicians, got their ideas on it and their suggestions on it. And when we felt we had enough of them, we made a composite of all these ideas and tried to incorporate them in the guitar so that we'd have the best features of everything that they were talking about. And I think that's where the Stratocaster, how it evolved. I know that's how it evolved, but I think that was why it was successful.
There were so many people contributed ideas. Freddie contributed a lot of them. And Bill Carson, as example, Bill thought the new guitar, which was going to be called the Stratocaster, he felt that it should have 6 bridge sections, and he also told Leo that the contouring, that I think Bill had a lot to do with that, same as Rex Gallion. And the thing is, he listened to all the musicians. The Stratocaster was not designed for any particular person. It was designed to broaden the line. We had quite a few salesmen at that time, and they had to have something to sell. Now, they had the Telecaster, but you needed to broaden the line.
It was market driven. We had a very plain Jane Telecaster guitar Gibson came out with a Les Paul. It was a nice looking instrument, you know, it was pretty. And we needed just an upgrade in our instrument. And after prevailing on Leo, say, we got to do something to upgrade our instrument, to make the next step up. And so we eventually developed the Stratocaster guitar.
Gibson had never made a solid body guitar in its entire history. And Leo Fender was making some solid body guitars out on the West Coast, and they were becoming popular. And I was watching to see what he was doing and how his guitars were going, and they were being accepted by the players. So I talked to the board of directors and said, you know, maybe we ought to join him. So we decided we would make a solid body guitar. And we spent a year at Gibson, everybody contributing to this, that, and the other thing. And we came up with the guitar that we then had to sell. Gibson, which was known for its acoustic guitars and acoustic electrics, but never for a solid body. Well, Les Paul was a friend of mine.
Production really picked up at that time, and in '54 we moved to new quarters. Well, actually in '53 I think we moved the first part of it over onto Raymond Avenue into the new buildings. I think it was March in '53 we moved into the first building, because we didn't have room to build. We grew completely out of, we were working outside.
I don't recall many Sundays that I ever went by there that his car wasn't parked out there. He'd work 7 days a week. He would not have any children because the business itself was his child. He explained that to me one time, that there was no time for children if you owned a business. And he would work to the degree that his health almost cost him his life one time.
We had 6 or 7 different companies which we owned. There was Fender Sales, there was Fender Electric Instruments, there was Randall Publishing, there was Fender Sales of Oklahoma. What else? Whatever they were, we had a number of different companies which we owned jointly. Leo was very dedicated. He stayed in the lab there or in the shop, and that was his work and his hobby. And he worked at it 24 hours a day and seldom did anything else. And he didn't smoke and he didn't drink and he didn't like anybody that did. And how he could get along with some of these Western players, I don't know, but he managed to. And he got to the point where he wanted to get out of the business. He thought he'd achieved what he wanted to do, and he didn't see a whole lot of future in it anymore to continue with it. And he wanted me to buy his interests. And I could have done it at the time. I had the money to do it, or at least access to the money. But I didn't know that I wanted to do it either, because it meant going out on a limb for quite a hunk by myself. And I gave it some thought. I even find that in Richard Smith's book that our accountant had approached him to buy the company at one time, which I didn't know, our mutual accountant. And of course, Leo wouldn't sell it to him on a bet because he knew I wouldn't put up with it. Baldwin Piano came along, and they were very interested. And I had long sessions with a guy by the name of Morley Thompson, who was, I guess, the executive vice president of Baldwin, and even Lucian Wilson himself, who was chairman. And I went back to their plant in Cincinnati and had conferences with them there, and Lucian came out here, and we went back and forth on this, but I didn't like the way they had structured the deal. In the meantime, the company that would have taken us public had an investment banking department, and a fellow by the name of Dean Woodman, who I felt was probably one of the sharpest guys I'd ever run into, said, "Hey, you know, if you don't want to go public, well, we can find you a good buyer." I said, "Well, do what you can." So he came up with CBS. Oh, CBS doesn't want to buy a guitar company, for crying out loud. I said, oh, you'd be surprised. So finally, we came to an agreement which I felt was probably adequate. And I called Leo and I said, how's that sound to you? He said, you got to be kidding. I said, no, Leo. I said, I think we got a deal on this thing. And he just couldn't believe it, you know. Here he'd wanted to sell the company for $1.5 million, and he couldn't believe what had happened. We closed the deal, and Leo wouldn't even go back for the signing.